Elijah Kane, a forgotten American explorer, doctor, author, artist, hero, and leader. He is most well known for his Arctic explorations of the 1850s. His accomplishments led to a better understanding and further exploration of the Arctic. He was a complex man that will hopefully, one day, get the recognition he deserves. Today I'm going to give you a quick summary of Elijah's biography and highlight some relevant historical information and events that were happening during Elijah's life. I'm going to discuss Elijah's leadership style, the faults in his leadership, and how all this information is relevant today. As I just stated, I'm going to begin by giving you a quick summary of the biography I read. Race to the Polar Sea, The Heroic Adventures of Elijah Kane was the book I read over the course of the semester. It was written by Ken McGugan in 2009. This biography used historical documents, letters, and books written by Kane as resources to piece together the life of this forgotten hero. Kane was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to a rich family. His father was a judge, his mother a housewife, and he had at least two brothers, Willie and Thomas. He attended medical school and graduated in 1842. He opened a practice but dreamed of traveling the world. He joined the Navy as a naval surgeon but never got called to duty. He instead saved his money and traveled the world. The book mainly focused on Kane's Arctic expeditions. I think this topic is most relevant to this case study, and so it'll be my main focus as well. Kane joined a voyage in the search of Sir John Franklin, a British Royal Navy officer and Arctic explorer. Franklin went missing while trying to navigate the Northwest Passage. When Kane and the other men were searching Beechey Island, a sailor found 3 graves with headstones that explained the 3 men buried were part of Sir Franklin's team. The crew found other items left behind that suggested that Sir Franklin overwintered on Beechey Island. Their ship became ice-locked, but it was later freed by the summer sun, and they made it back home in September of 1851. Kane's second expedition started when he spoke with Sir Franklin's wife, Jane. She wanted Kane to search for her husband or find evidence that he might still be alive. Kane also had motive to explore the Arctic. He hypothesized that at the top of the Earth there was a warm water, open polar sea, and he wanted to find it before anyone else could. He received donations and gathered a crew. The crew left New York on May 31st, 1853. He made gutsy moves, such as taking the notoriously dangerous Middle Ice and tying a ship to a fast-moving iceberg. The latter almost had them all killed when a piece of one of the icebergs broke off. As the weather got colder, the crew settled in on what Kane called Butler Island. Their ship, the Advance, quickly becoming ice-locked. They buried provisions under rocks and ice to hide them from polar bears. The winter, with its 50 to 60 degree below zero temperatures, was hard on the crew. Men became sick and frostbitten. Food was scarce, and most of the sled dogs died. As a result, 2 men died that winter after having frostbitten limbs amputated. During this winter, Kane battled with illness himself. He became sick often, even before leaving for the Arctic. It was one of the reasons he studied medicine. During the summer, Kane took a dog sled south to see if the ice was breaking up. He discovered it was not, and he knew they would be staying for a second winter. With this news, the crew became distraught. Many wanted to leave to reach Upper Navik. Kane gave them provisions and wished them well. However, they ended up back on the Advance after many of them could no longer walk. Kane made friends with the Inuit, which turned out to be their saving grace. The Inuit taught the men how to hunt, make proper clothing, and better sleds. Again, the cold temperatures challenged the men. They battled scurvy, and their supplies were quickly dwindling. Of the 18 men, only 6 were of use. After a fire on the Advance, Kane knew it was no longer useful and that they must move in order to survive. They took 2 small fishing boats and sledges of provisions and headed south to Upper Navik. It took them 82 days in the life of one of their men, but they finally reached Upper Navik, where a rescue ship took them to the United States. Kane died in 1857 after facing illness and having 2 strokes, causing him to become paralyzed. His body was taken by boat and train back to Pennsylvania. The mourning that followed his death included a 3-week funeral procession, eulogies in 6 states, and badges declaring that his memory shall be immortal. His passing can only be compared in that era to the grief inspired by the passing of Abraham Lincoln. So after all of his accomplishments and such a grand passing, why was Kane forgotten? Well, this has to do with the historical events happening at the same time that Kane was alive. When Kane returned home from his second Arctic adventure, the New York Times devoted its entire front page to his arrival. It's hard to believe that we have never learned about this man in history classes. However, the 1800s to the 1900s were marked by events such as slavery being repealed, the beginning of the Great Depression with the Panic of 1837, the war with Mexico, the beginning of the Civil War, Lincoln becoming president, and many more important and well-known events. Another reason we may not know about Elijah Kane is because, according to McGugan, many of Kane's documents have been lost or destroyed. Many were lost when Kane's ship was raided in Egypt. Kane destroyed others because they contained information about his secret marriage. Still others, such as Kane's will, were destroyed by his brother out of greed. So while Kane was a celebrity and a hero in the 1800s, his accomplishments were overshadowed by better-known, history-changing events. Also, his documents were poorly handled and preserved, making it difficult to follow his life history. Continuing that thought, I have a quick video by Michael Robinson explaining what a leader looked like in the 19th century.
That I think is important to realize about Kane is the way he is described. There is certainly plenty of illustrations of Kane after he dies, wearing furs, looking rugged. But in fact, the more interesting part of Kane's eulogy is that people were very impressed with Kane, not for being a tough guy, but for being a man of cultivation. It's a little bit hard to see. Any chance we could bring down the lights? Well, if it's possible. But I'll tell you what this scene is here. This is Kane aboard the Advance. So he's actually in his ship. Tell that it's nighttime because, well, there's a guy here that you can't see, but there's a man sleeping on the side, and Kane is covered in furs, and he's spending his time probably writing his narrative, writing his journal, or writing down scientific observations. Kane, when he dies, is praised as a man of science and cultivation, not as being a tough guy. In fact, I have some of the quotations. So, for example, John Fraser, who was a scientist and a local of Philadelphia, said of Kane, "His was a scientific mind by which he was enabled to see the connection which lay between phenomena." So this is a scientist. The other interesting thing about this picture, which was painted, by the way, also after Kane's death in 1859 by Thomas Hicks, is look how pale he is. I mean, from where you're sitting is practically the only thing you can see. I mean, he looks like he's about to die of blood loss. He was a man of very delicate health because of rheumatic fever. You would think that his eulogists would play down the fact that he was such a weak guy, but no, they play it up. Listen to some of the eulogies of Kane. His strength of character, quote, raised his feeble frame above bodily weakness. Another writer wrote, he was prone to seasickness whenever there was a breeze enough to cause the slightest swell. And one of his crewmates said, his palate was delicate, but he accustomed himself to eating puppies and rats. A housemaid who worked for Kane said of him, praised him for his, quote, pretty, gentle manners, his sweet young face, and his lovely complexion like a girl's. And another wrote that he had the gentle qualities of a woman. These are not the kinds of descriptions we usually associate with the Arnold Schwarzenegger brand of explorer. And I was struck by this when I read it, that people were playing up his frailties rather than playing them down. And I began to realize as I saw this figure of Kane that one of the bigger stories of Arctic exploration is you begin to get a sense of what it means to be a male hero in the 19th century. In 1850, it was not about muscularity. It was really about a kind of inner will. The reason I think that eulogists played up his frailties is because it created a contrast with his inner strength of character, his self-control.
Obviously, there's a difference between how we perceive heroes today and how they were perceived in the 19th century. As a result, Kane might not be seen as a hero in modern-day terms and is thus easily forgotten or overlooked. Even though he's not well known, Elisha Kent Kane should still be recognized for his leadership skills. During his time as captain, Kane displayed many leadership styles. The two that I most noticed are situational leadership and team leadership. Elisha displayed situational leadership as he faced different obstacles while in the Arctic. As stated by Nordhaus, a situational leader must evaluate his or her followers and assess how competent and committed they are to perform a given goal. The leader would then change the degree to which they are directive or supportive based on the analysis of the situation. Overall, I would say Kane was directive. For example, when Kane decided to take the fast route through Middle Ice, another man, Carl Peterson, argued that taking an inshore track was the only safe route. Ignoring Carl's concerns, Kane maneuvered through Middle Ice and saved days or even weeks of travel time. Another example can be seen when the crew encountered their first winter. The crew wanted to travel south to overwinter, but Kane wanted to stay north because of his advantage over other ships. They stayed north and faced many issues with the cold winter. However, when the situation warranted, Kane could be supportive. As I stated before, when the crew heard they would have to stay for a second winter, many of them wanted to make a dangerous trip south in hopes of taking a ship home. Kane was angry because he knew they might die, and he needed all the manpower he could get. However, he couldn't ethically force them to stay. He gave them supplies and hoped for the best. He supported their mission even though he didn't want them to leave. He also delegated power when he was away from the ship. On one account, Kane took 7 men to explore and left a trusted sailor, Olsen, in charge. Lastly, it can be assumed that he coached his crew because most of them had no sailing experience. In order for them to survive, Kane and a few other men had to teach them the way of a sailor. Kane displayed team leadership as well. Teams offer greater productivity, more effective use of resources, better decision-making and problem-solving, and greater innovation and creativity, all of which are helpful advantages in sub-zero Arctic winters. When Elisha wasn't being direct, he was focused on the best interest of his team. He was always there for his crew members when they needed him most. He would rescue them from a mission went wrong, and they also had his back when he would become sick. Kane had his own motives, but the shared goal within the group was to survive, and they couldn't have done it without a group effort. While the group didn't contain all 8 of the characteristics of the team leadership model, they did contain enough to be successful. Out of the 18 men that started the journey, 14 of them made it home. 3 died, and 1 stayed in an Arctic village after falling in love with a native. After 2 brutal winters and a treacherous journey to Upper Navik, only having 3 deaths in a team is a success to me. Based on their conditions, all men should have died, but with Kane as a leader and a medical doctor, he managed to save most of them. I do think it's important to note that in the 1840s, the main leadership style was trait-based. The great man theory states that great leaders are born, not made. This was the archetypal leadership style when Kane was in charge of the advance. Based on the great man theory, leaders are seen to have a divine gift and typically treated as so. I think it is equally as important to note that Kane did act according to the great man theory, but he also branched out beyond that into more compassionate leadership styles. Without a doubt, Kane had power. He was smart, brave, rich, and influential. Different situations gave him different types of power. He had referent, information, expert, and legitimate power. When Kane returned from his first Arctic exploration, he would deliver speeches at the Smithsonian detailing what he learned. During these speeches, he had information and referent power. The other scientists and travel enthusiasts adored him and sought the information he had gained about the Arctic. His expert power was gained through his writing. His book brought him what would be millions of dollars today. People believed his writing and saw him as an expert because he was the first to travel that far north. Without much knowledge about the Arctic, normal day people saw him as a genius. Lastly, his legitimate power came from his position as captain. The other sailors had to respect and obey his authority because it was in their contracts. However, I think many of the men did like him and wanted to help. While Kane was a good leader, he had flaws. When referring to the situational leadership style, Kane could have more appropriately adjusted his leadership style. As I stated earlier, he was primarily direct. One of the crew members, John Wall Wilson, wrote in a private journal that Kane was peevish, coarse, sometimes insulting. He thinks no one knows anything but himself. This also transfers to the faults in his team leadership style. He endangered his crew on many occasions on the account of his own selfish acts, such as when he went through Middle Ice, sent crew members in search the Humboldt Glacier when they were unprepared, and fumigated the Advance, accidentally setting it on fire. All of these acts could have killed most or even all of his men. He was selfish and even sometimes silly. Even through his faults, I think Kane was a hero who deserves recognition. His achievements outweigh his faults. So how is all this information relevant today? While Arctic exploration has become much easier, leadership is still a difficult and complicated concept that is ever changing. I think we can learn from the past and come up with better leadership concepts. Like some of the case studies we have read, I wanted to find a modern day problem and compare it to the leadership displayed by Elijah to see how far we have come. I read the 2014 article, Navy Sailors Distrust Commanders, Fear Crippling Political Correctness. The article outlined the issues with modern-day leadership within the Navy. It states that Navy sailors harbor widespread mistrust in the admirals who command them, complaining of poor leadership and disciplinary environment that tolerates absolutely no mistakes. It continues to state that sailors are upset about long deployment times at sea and excessive political correctness. When comparing this to the leadership style of Kane, I see one major similarity. Kane held a high standard for behavior. On 2 occasions, 2 men got drunk and used inappropriate language. Kane punished them by holding them below deck and reducing their food rations only to bread. He wanted his men to act like gentlemen even in the most difficult of situations. It appears that is still held true today. While I don't think it's appropriate for Navy sailors to get drunk and cause problems, I do wonder if sailor etiquette is too strict for modern-day war. These men and women are under great stress and sometimes they need to act out without the threat of getting in trouble. I think creating a leadership style that allows for that would be much more successful and would allow for trust between Navy leaders and sailors. This comparison showed me that there is still room for improvement when it comes to finding appropriate leadership styles in difficult situations. I hope you learned a lot about Elijah Kent Kane and his accomplishments. While he had flaws in his leadership, he was still a great leader that saved the lives of his crew members. Even though he never found the open polar sea, he did travel further north than anyone else had at that point. People envied him, and he made a good life for himself with the money he made from his books. I also hope that now you never forget Elijah Kent Kane and that you spread the information you learned today. Every person that knows about Elijah Kent Kane is getting one step closer to giving him the recognition he deserves. Thank you.